Chapter 16. Decline of the Kingdom. The decline of millennialism in Mormon history thus coincided with the decline of the belief in the political kingdom of God. Quest for Empire, Klaus Hansen, page 23. Mormonism's opponents thought they could destroy the saints with mobs, martyrdoms, Mormon Battalion Utah war and government-appointed lawyers and judges. But all these tactics failed. The new plan was to attack the Mormons for polygamy, which would create more support for their anti-Mormon legislation. This was a subject that resulted in media headlines, lies and false propaganda from the pulpits, and the wrath of politicians. The Mormons tried to defend themselves by writing and preaching in favor of the principle of plural marriage. For example, Parley P. Pratt explained to Rev. Briggs, as polygamists, Abraham, Isaac and Jacob are approved and commended by Jesus Christ, who expressly declares that many shall come from the east, and from the west, and from the north, and from the south, and shall sit down with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob in the kingdom of God. While, at the same time, he declares that those wicked and adulterous persons, who in that age considered themselves the children of the kingdom, should be thrust out. I sincerely hope my mistaken friends here will learn ere that eventful day to distinguish between a house of polygamy and a crowd of adulterers. But they might by mistake consider the kingdom of God a house of ill fame, and go with the wrong crowd. Again, Sir John the Revelator describes the eternal Jerusalem of heaven, the royal city of God, as peopled and governed by the great family of polygamists, which, in its lineage, includes Jesus and the holy prophets and apostles of all ages. The pearly gates are embellished with the names of 12 polygamists, the sons of 4 women by 1 man. While, on the other hand, this same John expressly declares that the place for all liars, sorcerers, whoremongers, and adulterers is outside, and that there shall in no wise enter into the city anything that defileth or maketh a lie. Autobiography of Parley P. Pratt, 1979 pb. ed. pages 419 to 420. But such explanations usually fall on deaf ears. Another plan to destroy the Mormons and their kingdom was to bring in an influx of Gentiles with their laws and customs. This was accomplished with the coming of the railroad, bringing a new breed of people into the Salt Lake Valley. Numerous Gentiles, merchants, land speculators and lawyers, all flocked to the valleys to see if they could personally enrich themselves. Historian Leonard Arrington described this condition. The completion of the Pacific Railroad in 1869 posed 3 threats to the Mormon kingdom in the Great Basin. 1. Offering, as it did, opportunities for Eastern and Midwestern enterprisers to exploit new mines and markets, the railroad threatened the continuance of theocratic control of the region. 2. Entailing increased commercial intercourse. It threatened the economic autonomy of the exclusively Mormon Commonwealth, and 3. By involving the Mormons increasingly in worldly trade and exchange, the railroad threatened to break up the kingdom of saints into conflicting segments, and to secularize economic relationships generally. Great Basin Kingdom, Arrington, page 234. Brigham Young also described this condition in a letter to his son. We have had quite an influx of lawyers into the city of late. Like the birds of prey, they snuff the carcass from afar. Business is poor where they have been, but they imagine that with the land claims and other business the enemies of the truth promise them here, they will reap an abundant harvest. Armies have not been found to operate well in breaking us up, but it is now hoped that vexatious lawsuits and setting up and enforcing claims for our land may do it. Mill, Star 28-604. Along with the increase of Gentiles, came the emphasis on making money and personal profit in mining. In 1866, a woman by the name of C.V. Waite published a book, The Mormon Prophet, in which she wrote, among the agencies already at work to accomplish this desirable end, and to redeem Utah from her enthrallment, may be mentioned the discovery of mines of precious metals, and the large influx of miners. These hidden riches, thank God, have been brought to light. Miners are flocking in by the thousands, and their rights will be protected, if necessary, by the strong arm of a strong government. Mormonism will soon give way before the advancing tide of American civilization. Pages 279 to 280. Unfortunately, this tide of American civilization was the kind of tide that destroys, not builds up. The Mormon enthrallment referred to the kingdom of God. The American civilization included thieves, drunks, murderers, and prostitutes. In 1872, Alta had a population of 5,000 with 23 saloons, 2 breweries, a long line of houses of prostitution, and a list of over 100 miners killed in fights and saloon brawls. It was the same in many other American settlements. Thanks to the railroads, American civilization had arrived in Utah. The Mormons had had experience with this civilization in Missouri and Illinois, and had gone west to try to get away from it. About 20 years later, enemy settlers followed and infiltrated. Near the close of the Civil War, Colonel Connor, the father of Utah mining, and Governor Harding, worked together to publish a short-lived anti-Mormon newspaper called The Vendetta. These two took an active step to cooperate with corrupt politicians and apostate Mormons in opposing Brigham Young, similar to what had happened to Joseph Smith. This renewed verbal attack would continue for another 25 years. During the late 60s, the non-Mormon and anti-Mormon elements began in earnest their attacks against polygamists. This effort was so volatile, it had the potential of war. In 1870, a political caucus was organized for a new Utah Liberal Party. Their newspaper was called the Tribune. Mormon political, economic, and religious rights were being increasingly denied. Politicians saw Utah as a place of vast economic and political advantages. Like gold miners dashing to the gold fields, government agents rushed to the Utah Territory to confiscate Mormon personal, private, and church properties. Even though it was all unconstitutional, it was legal. A similar transition had occurred when the Romans supposedly became Christians. It is written that in 325 AD the Romans became Christians, but in reality the Christians became Romans. It was evident that the battle for the kingdom was not going as victoriously or as courageously as did the Utah War. It appeared all would be lost. Klaus Hansen elaborated. When it became apparent that the enemy was willing to retreat in return for some painful concessions, and that the Lord was not about to destroy the adversaries of the kingdom, hopes for a miraculous delivery receded. The decline of millennialism in Mormon history thus coincided with the decline of the belief in the political kingdom of God. Quest for Empire, Hansen, page 23. As the Mormons' faith in the millennialism kingdom began to wane, so did their interpretation of it. Their efforts toward maintaining a practical kingdom began to lean more toward just a theoretical hope of it. They believed their enemies were too powerful. The situation was similar to when the Israelites perceived their enemy to be giants, and they told Moses, "We were in our own sight as grasshoppers, and so we were in their sight." Num. 1333, however, the Lord had told the Israelites to go up against their enemies. But when they refused, the Amalekites came down, and the Canaanites which dwelt in that hill, and smote them, and discomfited them. Num. 1445. Because they had failed to fight, their losses were greater than if they had gone to battle as God had commanded. If we didn't know better, it would seem that the modern Mormons were the children of Israel reincarnated. As persecution increased, the saints' belief in and support of the kingdom of God decreased. During the 1880s, there were over 20 bills against the Mormons that were presented to Congress. Most of these bills and laws were prejudicial and were aimed at taking property and political power. Passing legislation against the Mormons became politically popular and gained votes for their party. It was like kicking a wounded dog, knowing he couldn't bite back. Both Democrats and Republicans tried to outdo each other to gain votes by attacking the Mormons, and most of the bills presented became laws. Morrill Bill, 1862. Wade Bill, 1866. Cragen Bill, 1867. Ashley Bill, 1869. Cullum Bill, 1870. Poland Bill, 1874. Arthur Bill, 1881. Edmunds Bill, 1882. Segregation Ruling, 1884. Edmunds Tucker Bill, 1887. Very little thought went into these anti-Mormon bills as to their constitutionality. Even Mark Twain made more sense than the congressman. He spoke to Lillian Whiting, who was crusading against the Mormons, and said, "Am I a friend of the Mormon religion? No. I would like to see it extirpated, but always by fair means, not these congressional rascalities. If you destroy it with a book by arguments and facts, but not brute force, you will do a good and wholesome work." Brigham Young, M.R. Warner, page 359. It was not the law, the facts, the Constitution, or individual rights that the federal lawmakers were interested in. It was politics, popularity, and money. Are we to assume that Washington legislators who were committing adultery and had mistresses and prostitutes were really concerned about immorality of the Mormon marriage system? Immorality in Washington then was no different than it is now. How can we expect Bill Clinton to understand biblical morality and the marriage commitments of Mormonism? Polygamy was just the obvious and most unpopular aspect of Mormonism that the government could turn public opinion against. But in reality, there were more deep-seated threats that the politicians were concerned about, i.e., the political kingdom of God and the economic system of the United Order. They knew that with the passage and enforcement of all these anti-Mormon laws, the very foundation of Mormonism would begin to crumble. All three of the basic fundamentals upon which the Mormons had built their empire were in jeopardy. 1. Their political kingdom of God. 2. Their temporal power in the United Order. And 3. Their population growth through plural marriage. Leonard Arrington recorded the eventual abandonment of these three fundamentals. The most influential of all the anti-Mormon bills was the Edmunds Act passed in 1882, which in essence removed the government of Utah from the hands of the Mormons and placed it in the hands of a commission appointed by the national president. It was quickly followed, in 1887, by the Edmunds-Tucker Act, in which Congress provided for the confiscation of the properties of the Mormon Church. Eventually, church leaders found it necessary to give up the unequal struggle and attempted to bring their ideas and practices more into conformity with the prevailing sentiment of the federal Congress. National leaders and church leaders are said to have entered into a compact. We do not know whether such a compact was actually made, but at least the agreement and actions which it is said to have involved did take place. In the supposed compact, national leaders are said to have promised statehood for Utah, provided three things were done. 1. Plural marriage was abandoned. 2. The church political party was dissolved. And 3. The church dissolved its relations with the economy. Plural marriage, of course, was abandoned with the Manifesto of 1890. The People's Party was dissolved in 1891, and the people were divided between Republicans and Democrats, and the church began to take steps to withdraw from many of its economic activities. Religion and Economics in Mormon History. Arrington, BYU Studies, 331-32. The compact had a disastrous effect upon the basic structure of Mormonism and the Kingdom of God. By the turn of the century, the Mormons had abandoned their economic United Order, their political Kingdom of God, and their social polygamy doctrines. They not only shook hands with the enemy, but actually joined their ranks as well. President Buchanan had sent an army against the Mormons to prove to the Democrats that he was opposed to at least one of the twin relics of barbarism. However, after negotiations with the Mormons and a peace settlement was made, it still did not stop the tide of prejudice and hatred against the Mormons. Nevertheless, the handwriting was on the wall for Young's Mormon Kingdom. Further government attacks on polygamy and the political kingdom were delayed only by the Civil War. Beginning in the 1870s, the United States Congress exerted increasing pressure on the Mormons, who, in 1890, were forced to relinquish polygamy and the political kingdom as the price of their religion's survival. Mormon President Wilford Woodruff's manifesto disavowing any further sanctioning of plural marriages by the church symbolized the passing of an era and the beginning of the reconciliation of Mormonism with the world. The Ankh of Religion, Simon and Schuster, Vol. 9, page 110. Klaus Hansen summarized the rise and fall of the Kingdom Council. Joseph Smith organized a secret council of 50 in the spring of 1844. This council continued as one of the most influential organizations in Mormon history until about the turn of the century. As long as the influence of the council persisted, Mormonism was bent on establishing itself as a political as well as an ecclesiastical authority. The suspected goals and activities of the Council of 50 and the political Kingdom of God were, therefore, the primary cause for the harrowing persecutions which the saints suffered throughout the 19th century. But because of the intense secrecy, the Mormons could always deny, with some success, the accusations of their enemies. Yet they could not deny polygamy. Hence, the Gentiles deliberately crusaded against polygamy in order to destroy the political kingdom of God. The disappearance of the Council of 50, therefore, far exceeds in significance the demise of polygamy. The death of the political kingdom clearly marked the most incisive watershed in the history of Mormonism. Quest for Empire, Hansen, Frontispiece. It was very clear that Washington wanted to destroy the social structure, the political power and the economic order of Mormonism. Press. Wilford Woodruff stood on dangerous ground by giving the saints his advice to give up plural marriage when he issued the manifesto. However, his compromise with the enemy to give up the United Order and the Kingdom of God in exchange for statehood was even more serious. Relinquishing these three vital priesthood doctrines placed the church in a similar position to the ancient Israelites, who, by rejecting the higher laws, then functioned under the order of the Aaronic priesthood. Salvation and exaltation depend upon the laws we live. The Lord has made this very clear. For he who is not able to abide the law of a celestial kingdom cannot abide a celestial glory. D&C 88:22. And the church are not united according to the union required by the law of the celestial kingdom, and Zion cannot be built up unless it is by the principles of the law of the celestial kingdom. otherwise I cannot receive her unto myself. D&C 105 4-5. Brigham Young also clarified, No person can be exalted in the kingdom of heaven without first submitting himself to the rules, regulations, laws and ordinances of that kingdom, and being perfectly subject to them in every respect. J.D. 15 220. If we obey the laws of a Gentile kingdom, can we expect to receive the blessings of God's kingdom? Orson Pratt saw danger signs for the Mormons as he read some of the prophecies, and he tried to warn the saints. Behold, I say unto you, the redemption of Zion must needs come by power. Therefore, I will raise up unto my people a man who shall lead them, like Moses led the children of Israel. For ye are the children of Israel, and of the seed of Abraham, and ye must needs be led out of bondage by power, with an outstretched arm. And as your fathers were led at the first, even so shall the redemption of Zion be. D&C 103 15-18. It seems, then, that this people, at some future time in their sojourn here in this land, may possibly be in bondage greater than they are at the present time. I try to hope for the best, and to think that the bondage we are in and have been in for years, in consequence of the efforts of those who are striving to take away our rights as American citizens, and to trample us down in the dust, I say I have been in hopes that that would be all the bondage that was meant here in this prophecy, but I do not know. But what there may be a greater signification to these words. I do not know what the purposes of the Lord are in relation to this particular thing. It may be that we shall have our rights completely taken from us. It may be, if we do not live sufficiently faithful before the Lord, that he will yet bring us into still greater tribulation than that which we have hitherto had. It may be that we shall yet be in bondage like the Israelites in the land of Egypt. J.D. 17 289 303. It should not be difficult for the Latter-day Saints to realize we are now in both temporal and spiritual bondage and that the kingdom of God has declined to the point that it is collectively non-existent.